Sir.
Hi, thank you very much for being here. My name is Bill Rivers. I'm a student of Penn. There's a bunch of Penn students here. I don't disagree with anything that you said, but I did have a question. Here in the West, we tend to think that the human person, human nature, which is immutable, unchangeable, a real thing. At least here in the West, we think that it tends to want to be free and to want to comport itself with an understanding of freedom that is kind of anchored in a Judeo-Christian sense. So, if that's true, then shouldn't the people in the Middle East, who are also human beings and who we think have that latent desire, see and then warm and react to that same desire and have that in the absence of overbearing authoritative pressure or contract? And if it's not true, then don't we have a bigger problem in that one of our central tenets appears to be mistaken? If these people don't have that same kind of deep development desire, does that make sense? Is there a cross-civilizational contradiction here? And is there a way to rectify it?
Well, that's an extremely good question. You know, the Declaration of Independence speaks of these principles as being self-evident. But they're only self-evident to those who understand the terms of the proposition. If you don't have a vocabulary in your own culture to understand these self-evident propositions, you can't accept them. Now, in Arabic, there were no words for conscience, for secular, for democracy. There is, of course, no freedom of conscience in Islam. And you might ask yourself, how could you have freedom of something for which you don't even have a word? The sanctity, there is a word damir for conscience that they use now, but that's not what the word originally meant. And they have neologisms for secular and democracy and so forth, but none of them are indigenous to Arabic. The central, I would say the foundation of Western democracy is in Genesis, that we are made in the image and likeness of God. What is that image and likeness? Well, it's reason, it's free will, it's the ability of our minds to know the difference between right and wrong, and the freedom of our wills to choose between them. These are essentials. If I were to make the statement to a Muslim that you are made in the image and likeness of God, I would immediately be accused of blasphemy. I was at an iftar dinner a couple of years ago, an interfaith kind of thing, and a Baptist minister got up and said, "Here we are all together, what a wonderful evening, we are all children of God, made in His image and likeness." Very wonderful. A Jewish rabbi got up and said the same thing. Then the imam got up and said some warm and fuzzy things, and of course he didn't say that. So I prodded him after the dinner, and I said, "Imam, I noticed you didn't say we're all made in the image and likeness of God." And he blanched. He knew, the one little thing they don't want to have heard or said is precisely it is blasphemous to suggest that a human being is made in the image and likeness of God. Now, if you're not made in the image and likeness of God, tell me what the source of sovereignty is in Islam. Sovereignty in Islam is God's alone. Man, there is no basis for man's sovereignty. It simply doesn't exist. It was very interesting, one Islamist in Egypt who was elected to the parliament made the statement, well, what's left to legislate? We've got the Quran, we have God's legislation. What's left to legislate? It's God who tells us what to do, not man. There's a famous saying in Islamic jurisprudence, reason is not a legislator. Reason is not a legislator. All you do with your reason is interpret the scriptures you're given, but reason itself is not a legislator. Well, if reason isn't a legislator, why have legislature? There's simply no foundation for it. I mean, if we had time, I could go into detail of the many, the thesis of my book, by the way, I can put in one dense sentence, that Islamism is a spiritual pathology based on a deformed theology that has produced a dysfunctional culture. So spiritual pathology based on a deformed theology that has produced a dysfunctional culture. And that's what you have in the Middle East and other large parts of the Muslim world. Their access to reality is gone because of this deformed theology that doesn't let them accept things like cause and effect in the natural world. Right? Everybody see this? What happened? What? Gravity, sure. You've all just committed the sin of shirk by ascribing a natural law, gravity, to my pen falling. According to the majority Sunni Islamic theological school, Ash'arism, it is God who brought the pen to the desk and bounced it off to the floor. And if you say otherwise, that a human agency did that, you are creating, once again, it's blasphemy, it's shirk. Their conception of God as omnipotent is so radical that nothing else can be so much as potent. That's why free will is denied in the majority of Sunnism. So you have this distorted idea of who God is and therefore of who man is, and you don't have the cultural, philosophical. Well, the other thing is you don't have philosophy. Philosophy was extirpated in the Islamic world after the 12th century. So without a re-Hellenization of Islam, without that, I don't see how they can work their way to the proposition that all people are created equal. I'm sorry I've gone on too long, but I'll just close by this. On next week, I will be with a group of Arab Muslim intellectual reformers. And this is another kind of work I do with the Westminster Institute, working with the Muslims who would agree with absolutely everything I said here tonight, and of their need to reformulate their theology. We'll close with this one sentence. It's more than a sentence from a theologian, Abdul Karim Sarouche, who is a Shiite. But nonetheless, his statement applies to both. I'll just stop, Patrick, after this. Here, listen to this. You need some philosophical underpinning, even theological underpinning, in order to have a real democratic system. Your God cannot be a despotic God anymore. A despotic God would not be compatible with the democratic rule, with the idea of rights. So you even have to change your idea of God, unquote. In other words, the problem we are facing, that Islam is facing, is not a social, psychiatric, economic problem. It's a theological problem, and it needs to be addressed at that level. Is there any other question? I'm sorry it took so long. Would this lady answer the question?
Yeah, I have a question. If the title of your book is The Closing of the Muslim Mind, was there a time when it was not closed?
Yes.
That was the great period when the Muslims were in Spain and so forth.
Well, I don't know. There was a period of Hellenization in Islam in which they absorbed Greek philosophy, and they began a rational school of theology called the Mutazilites that lasted through 3 caliphs, with the great Caliph Al-Mamun, who was the greatest proponent of Greek thinking in Islam. And unfortunately, it was then suppressed in the middle of the 9th century by force. And the the Asherite school of theology was the beneficiary of that lost struggle. So many Muslim reformers say we've got to go back to the 9th century and take a look at this Mutazilite thinking. King Hussein of Jordan, in his last interview, was asked, did Islam take a wrong turn in the 9th century with the suppression of the Mutazilites? He answered, yes, absolutely. That is correct, and we have to repair that damage. Thank you.